Disclaimer. This podcast is for FCA authorized financial advisors only and is not for retail clients. The views expressed in this content and all other content on this channel are those of the individual speaking and do not constitute financial advice or a recommendation to invest in any product, asset, or strategy, including those discussed in sponsored segments. This content is for educational purposes only. Always do your own research and consider all relevant risks before making any investment decisions.
I'm sick of watching what's happening over the pond, and how do we actually do something here? Let's put on a conference here in the UK. And we said it on the podcast, and yes, luckily enough, sponsors were listening.
Bitcoin, if it is a cult, is the only cult that I've ever found that espouses and encourages critical thinking. Right? So don't trust, verify. Right? Don't believe anything anyone is saying to you. There are no gurus. There's no centralized power. Go and learn about this for yourself.
There's a weird trend here that there is an abnormal amount of business owners on these spaces compared to normal day-to-day world. 300 billion is in business accounts of SMEs in the UK. Over half of that, over 150 billion, is at 0% interest rates. This particular Bitcoin community has 3 times the amount of business owners than just doing a straw poll on the street.
I want to surround myself with people who can get shit done.
Scott Allen, and he goes, right, I'm going for it. I'm like, going for what? He goes, I'm going to list. I'm like, what? And Scott at the time, I said, where are you? And he was at some train station having a Guinness. Big businesses have come to me and gone, really embarrassing question. Yeah, what is it? How do I buy it? Having the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's incredibly intelligent and incredibly well thought of, by the way, trying to lead the charge for Bitcoin in the UK is so important. It does need prominent, eloquent advocates. This is bloody important. And is after Kwasi, who comes next? Because I think what he's going to do is make it safe for not just political people, but maybe big business people to go, right, he's come out first in terms of he's pro this technology. Actually, yeah, I quite like it too.
Welcome to the Bitcoin IFA podcast. Today I'm joined by Jordan and Jez from the Bitcoin Collective, who recently launched the Bitcoin Business Network. We're going to run through that now. Jordan, you launched the Bitcoin Collective back in 2020, I believe. So let's start at the beginning. Why did you launch it? And what were the problems that you were trying to solve in the UK?
Yeah, so it actually started as a crypto podcast. It was like the very beginning, the birth of it. And it was called the Crypto Standard back in the day. And yeah, some people might shoot me for that now. But yeah, it started as a podcast just to explore the space even further. And it was like an opportunity to talk to the experts, the people that had been in it a lot longer. So we invited loads of guests on. Like we had the likes of Jeff Booth, Natalie Brunel, Larry Lepard, Greg Foss, like some of the people that were really the loudest voices back then. And it just kind of like shaped our understanding. So as you can probably see by what the company's called now, it's called the Bitcoin Collective. So they really helped us like understand the difference between cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And at the time it was me and my co-host. We were like, right, why are we talking about all the other cryptocurrencies? Our passion is Bitcoin. That's what we want to really focus on. And then one podcast, we were like, America are doing this, they're doing that. Everything seemed to be happening in America. So we were like, let's put on a conference here in the UK. And we said it on the podcast. And yes, luckily enough, sponsors were listening. So we got emails after saying, we'll back you if you do this. So yeah, that's then the birth of it. And we did the UK's first major Bitcoin conference back in 2022. We had over 30 speakers fly in for it from around the world. But then we had like institutions like that people might not expect. So we had like Coutts Bank on stage. We had members of parliament on stage. We had Fidelity on stage. And then charities like Save the Children, Charity Water. It was a real like bringing together of people and making something happen in the UK. And that was the big thing for me, was like, I'm sick of watching what's happening over the pond. And how do we actually do something here? And that was the first time, I think, I met Jez in Edinburgh.
Yeah, that was our first time. And actually, there's a few interesting things. Is you almost had to fill that room, you had to fly over at their own costs some bigger names, because the UK then was so quiet in terms of, I mean, I remember traveling up with David Parkinson, who then set Musket up after that. But you sort of thought, well, okay, how many UK sort of advocates could have stood on stage? Not many at all. And the other interesting thing that sort of transpired from that was, I think Freddie New was there. I didn't know, never met him there, but Jordan will always get the credit from those guys, and Susie, that's where Bitcoin Policy UK was formed, if you like, or the idea was spawned. I think probably from the frustration of, crikey, we've got these people flying in who are great from Canada, US, wherever, but here we are in the UK, in Edinburgh, and the UK is deathly silent on this whole topic. So yeah, it was a fabulous conference, and probably something we're looking at of doing larger conferences down the line, more retail focused.
I mean, absolute kudos to you for launching the first major Bitcoin conference in the UK. I'm shocked to hear. So from my own personal Bitcoin story and journey, I was in Lebanon at the time, right? So I found Bitcoin in sort of November, December 2020, whilst experiencing hyperinflation in Lebanon, and then stayed in Lebanon until 2023. Needless to say, there were no Bitcoin conferences in Lebanon. So I had no idea what was going on in the UK at the time. I'm actually shocked to hear that it was the first, that we were that far behind, because the Bitcoin conference, right, the one that's held in Nashville or Vegas every year, must have been at least half a decade old at that point. So to hear that there was tumbleweed in the UK, because someone like Peter McCormack, when did he launch what Bitcoin did? And now obviously we have cheat code as a consequence of that. So I'm absolutely shocked to hear that there was, essentially tumbleweed from the UK. So absolute kudos to you both. I'm interested, Jordan, just in case, or kudos to you, Jordan. Sorry, Jez, you were there as an attendee.
Absolutely zero kudos to me for Edinburgh.
And we've spoken about this offline, that it was a roaring success despite being in the same month as the FTX collapse, right? So we were a year into the bear market at that point, somewhere around that 9, 10, 11 months. And you got really great attendance. You had sponsors, you had people flying in to essentially help spread the word of Bitcoin in the UK. So huge kudos. There was something you mentioned there though, Jordan, that I want to touch on. What, like in a nutshell, we don't have to go into much depth on this, but what were the likes of Larry Lepard, Natalie Brunell, what were they saying to you about the difference between Bitcoin and all of the other cryptos that made you say, actually, no, Bitcoin is going to be our area of focus?
It's a good question, and it's something that we hear quite a lot, and it's the understanding for me really came from seeing like the marketing behind a lot of the cryptocurrencies, and then also making me question why I was actually getting into them, because Bitcoin, there's so many like ethical and I don't know how to describe it, but there's so many different ways to get into it rather than just an investment. We talk about the benefits it has to the energy markets, to the global south, to payments, to whatever it is. There's so many benefits to it. And for me to realize that, I think I needed to realize that. And that's what they helped me really on that journey, because I hadn't quite clocked it yet. I was still looking at it as Bitcoin is gold, and then some of the other coins are like silver and like just a little bit below it, but they're kind of similar. And it just made me realize like these are very different to the rest, or Bitcoin is very different to the rest.
You had a double, and again, I was pretty relatively newish to the space. I was sort of second lockdown, and I mean, I think I did have an X account, but it sort of just followed various, sports journalists and people and news, etc. But I guess Jordan, they pulled it off. There was another challenge, is what the whole Bitcoin and crypto debate is like. So what you had was essentially these two people, Jordan and Jim, running a crypto podcast, who then pivoted to a Bitcoin podcast, who then announced a Bitcoin conference. And actually the amount of sort of jip they got from a lot of Bitcoiners in the UK, it was quite astounding. I think I chatted to someone and it was almost like, crikey, these guys will be lucky to get 30 people there. But it was a real, I think it was a real watershed sort of moment. But I think a lot of credit would go back to the people from overseas who spent their own time and money to travel over, like your Jeff Booz. And the thing that I sort of remember to this day, I've never been a massive fan of conferences, but this was very different, that it wasn't huge. There was, say, 450, 500 people. But there was this breakout area. And what I, was amazed by, how you sort of, say you go to things, there's almost a hierarchy. And I remember, like the likes of Greg Foss and Samson Mao and all these people being there. And you sort of think, well, I'm new to Bitcoin. I've got this idea and this thing to talk about. And actually they go, you'd say, I remember it was Samson Mao, and I said, listen, can I just chat to you for 5 minutes? And he went, listen, I'll be 20 minutes, but just hang around. And you're like, oh, yeah. Sure enough, 20 minutes went by. He came back, he goes, right, what is it? And then I remember David Parkinson and I were chatting to Greg Foss, and he said, right, can we do this over lunch? And again, and he took us for lunch, and Natalie Brunel joined, and I think, who was it? Was it Martel Fox and others? And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. So, but yeah, those guys really, made it, what it was.
Yeah, massively. And like the fact that they did it all off their own back as well. It's like, because that was the start, like we asked them around, if we put on this conference, will you come? And the 5 people that I named earlier, they were all like, yes, we'll come and we won't charge you anything. Which is quite amazing. And it's like, there has been, so just to clarify, like there has been Bitcoin conferences in the UK, like ranging all the way back to, I want to say like 2012-ish, but a lot more technical, and not on the same scale that we were trying to pull off and then pulled off. So like, because the UK has had like there's been quite a lot going on in Bitcoin through its history, because we've had like the author of like the block size wars, of course, and then there's been a lot more technical communities within the UK, and it was like, we're not technical. How do we make this a little bit more relatable to other people? And that's what we were trying to pull off, and yeah, we did pull off.
There's a couple of things that you've both mentioned there that I just want to touch on. So Bitcoiners spending their own time and money to go and talk about Bitcoin is one of the things I absolutely love about the community. From one of the things I say in my workshops for IFAs is the Bitcoin community is often accused of being a bit of a cult, right? And that sounds a bit cultish, where you're like, I'm going to fly, in Jeff Booth's case, I think he was still based in Vancouver at the time, right? So I'm going to fly for 14 hours, probably longer actually. He's probably got a change in London to fly to Scotland, right? So he's probably traveling for a whole day, spending his own money to go and talk about Bitcoin. That sounds relatively cultish. But Bitcoin, if it is a cult, is the only cult that I've ever found that espouses and encourages critical thinking, right? So don't trust, verify, right? Don't believe anything anyone is saying to you. There are no gurus. There's no centralized power. Go and learn about this for yourself. And so I think for the people that may be shocked to understand that there are senior is probably not the right word, but influential Bitcoiners who would spend their own time and money to go to a conference because they believe in this new technology, in this new protocol. And then something you mentioned there, Jez, is how welcoming and open the Bitcoin community is. So I've only ever been to one conference, which was Cheat Code last year, right? And actually the breakout areas is where all of the fun happened.
Yeah.
This with Jordan and I. We spent half a day, I think, sat outside the food trucks. But I was able to approach Preston Pish, Natalie Brunel, James Lavish, Joe Bryan. I mean, very sort of influential public figures within the Bitcoin community. No ego. Most of them agreed to come on the podcast at some point. Hopefully gonna tap them up again at Cheat Code this year to say I've actually done the thing that I said I was going to do last year and launched a podcast. So, the likes of Jeff Booth coming on, giving their time to people with a very small platform like myself. And they're completely open. There is very few egos. Everyone wants to help each other in the community. And it's actually something I see. This is a nice segue, actually. I wasn't planning this, but this is a nice segue. It's something I really see in the UK Bitcoin community, colloquially and lovingly called Team GB, right? We all look out for each other. We're all trying to help. There is no competition yet, right? I think that may come in the future, but at the moment, Team GB and the UK Bitcoin community are incredibly collaborative. And that leads us on nicely into you guys recently launched the UK Bitcoin Business Network, the BBN. I'm delighted and proud to say that I'm a founding partner. Let's discuss that, right? So what is it? Who's it for? Right? And what are the problems that you're trying to solve in the UK by launching this?
Do you want me to go, or you want to start?
You go. Yeah, hit it and then I'll jump in.
So this, very simply, about beginning of 2025, we sort of, between us, decided, shall we dedicate some time and run a weekly Spaces on X for focusing on UK Bitcoin? 8 p.m. on a Monday night. And I said, look, I'm happy to do it. And I think we sort of didn't know whether it would be well received, whether we'd run out of steam in a couple of weeks. So it was more sensible me doing it through my direct account as opposed to, which actually was a sort of anonymous account back then, rather than through the collective, just to see what it was like. And we were pretty astounded, and people seemed to respond really well to it. And these voices started to appear who you may be following them on X, or you may never have heard of them. And I think it was important that we made it sort of UK only, because one criticism, I think, is there's a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of content out there, which is recycling the same people time and time again. And what we started to get was different people, listening, but also contributing and saying their piece. And, you had to, and still it's a challenge to this day in the UK that Jordan and I very often on a Monday will go, right, Spaces now on a Wednesday, what's the topic? Because if you're in the US, yes, it's bigger. There's a lot more to talk about. But this went well. But then it was quite early on. I would like to say it was sort of a couple of months of running. And you started to because you started to almost get to know these people a little bit, that the similar people would come up on stage every Monday and you get to know them and you'd be direct messaging. But then there was this sort of trend. And I remember distinctly saying to Jordan last sort of spring, saying, there's a weird trend here that there is an abnormal amount of business owners on these spaces compared to normal day-to-day world. And I remember going to this day and Googling, didn't use AI then, Googling going, what's the percentage of business owners in the UK versus, the rest of the working population? And then we did a poll, a survey on X, and said, listen, please only answer this if you're from the UK. Give us a guideline. Are you employed, self-employed, or running your own business, retired or unemployed? And then we had this spike where I think it was high 40s, wasn't it, Jordan, percent, were people either self-employed, running their own business, etc. So then you got thinking, going, right, okay. And I think this then dovetailed with, obviously, Strategy and Sailor built their sort of strategy before. And this is before, this was before the whole sort of Treasury company stuff. Then that sort of kicked off, and that was a different model. But then I started buying Bitcoin for the business. I had some Bitcoin personally, but my business was sort of decimated through COVID, and we had to shoulder a lot of debt. And my decision, probably wrongly actually, was to, okay, myself and my partner, let's get rid of this debt before we start, probably what we should have done is done it differently, but we didn't. And back then, suddenly I remember Coin Corner came out with an e-money account, because the big challenge we all know is in the UK, and I don't think it's all malicious, is if you send money from your bank to a Bitcoin crypto exchange, you depend on the bank, you are normally restricted on the amount you can do so, or there's a total ban. And I remember then these e-money accounts came out. So you could go with Coin Corner and open a business account with a sort code and account number. And simply, whatever the stance of your bank, you could transfer the funds from day-to-day bank to your Coin Corner e-money to then buy BTC. And back then, I remember, and it was probably myself and Scott who really got on the bandwagon with this. So we were always shouting about e-money accounts. And again, you get a lot of likes, you got a lot of feedback from people going, oh, how does this work again? Because I've got a business and I'm in this. And so it was probably, Jordan, it was after the summer, because I sort of went off for the summer. It wasn't long before our November event, was it, that we actually said, let's start a business network.
Yeah.
So it's probably 3.5 months of thought. It's only that long ago.
It's come, very fast. Because we've been like focusing more towards businesses for, I would say maybe like, what would you say, just over 6 months to a year, let's say.
Yeah.
And helping businesses, because we realized that once Jez did this poll, and then we started looking into it a lot more, and then you had the Treasury or the public Treasury boom, let's say, then it was a lot easier to have conversations with business owners. Is what we were finding is, yes, they've taken a risk already. They've taken a risk to build their own business. They're very critical thinking, because they will question things, like they are entrepreneurs. So when we were having these conversations, we were like, this is a lot easier to have these conversations, because these entrepreneurs, they understand the problem. If we highlight the problem to them, and we talk about just one aspect, is we talk about the devaluation of the pound, and money printing. We go into all that side of things. they understand that a lot more because they're used to balance sheets, cash flows. So it was then just right. How do we bring these people together? We did a survey actually, and that's quite a. We don't talk about it quite a lot, but that was quite an instrumental part in this. Is we put a survey out to I think it was just under 50 businesses, asking them if we were to set up what is now the Bitcoin Business Network, some sort of community for UK entrepreneurs that are pro Bitcoin. What would they like it to look like? What would they pay for it? Going into like the nitty gritty of it all, and yeah, that gave us the answers that we were looking for.
Yeah, and there was probably, to crystallize this, it was the two of us and Scott and Joe Bryan sort of brainstorming on this. And actually, Scott had the business angle idea probably first, albeit in a slightly very different format to how we've landed. But there was another piece that crystallized it. It was Coin Corner's annual report. And I'm thinking that was sort of last summer it came out, maybe a little bit later. And it showed in the UK this huge trend that basically retail was nowhere to be seen. And SMEs were opening accounts, which they hadn't sort of witnessed before. And that crystallized it. And I think that's pretty obvious is, you know, we all look around, and I look around with, you know, even some of my closest friends who are similar age to me in their 50s, you know, no one's got a lot of spare cash flying around personally. And a lot of their wealth is tied up in property, and you can't just go and easily refinance on as favorable terms as you could a few years ago. So I think there's a lot of people in retail who would love to be aggressively accumulating Bitcoin and can't. Whereas the flip side is, even though there's so much doom and gloom, there are a lot of businesses in the UK doing incredibly well. And they are making cash, they're profitable, they're doing well. Yes, they're probably paying higher taxes than they want to and what have you. And these aren't people who are just pivoting overseas and I'm going to go and live overseas. No, they're here. And then there was the big report that came out. And again, this is probably 18 months old, but we stumbled across it last year. And I reckon we stumbled across it about 12 months ago. And it was from the challenger business bank, Alica Bank. And they had this fabulous report. And basically, they're obviously a business bank championing SMEs. And the report said something like 300 billion is in business accounts of SMEs in the UK. Estimated. Over half of that, over 150 billion, is at 0% interest rates. And the other half is probably, they're getting about 2%.
Wow.
And that was the big thing of, right, well, what are these businesses doing with this cash? And then I started to think about myself and I thought, you've been so conditioned to just having cash in an account, making nothing, because you don't want to take risks with your business money, because you've got to be pretty, anything can happen in business. I then started thinking, well, you look at what Michael Saylor's doing. Why wouldn't I do that as a business owner? Not, and I think people still get it wrong. And a school dad said to me the other day, he goes, God, how's business? Hope it's good because the price of Bitcoin's dropped. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not taking 100% of our weekly profits and just buying Bitcoin with it and staring at a screen and trading. What I'm doing, and is I've sort of said that here's a responsible amount of money that, should business remain the same, that every single week I can just put into Bitcoin and forget about it. Because otherwise it's just going to sit in the bank and earn zero, or I can swap business banks and lock it up for 90 days to make a real small, and I think, that was the thing for us. And I think what we have found is, it's obviously, again, it's ground up, where you tend to find these are businesses that are very nimble with one or two owners. they're on the same page. They can make a decision very quickly. They don't have to get a family discussion with wife, husband of the joint savings account. And I think as well, they have probably a longer term view than the average person in a household. And also we all know as business owners, they're probably a bit more used to the unexpected and volatility than someone who has been in employment for 20 years with a salary that's... So it's been it's been really good, and it's been a really good fit, and it's been a really sort of really well received, and we've got loads of ideas, and it's just really nice having this sort of focus ourselves now. And I said to Jordan, as long as my day-to-day business, which I've been able to sort of get other people to now become directors and run, and I'm still involved, but I'm not involved day to day half as much as I was through choice. I've said, Jordan, we've got sort of 2 years to, I will give you minimum 2 years, but 2 years of my time, energy. Let's use my office space and let's create something in the UK. But it's got out of control in a really good way. I know this is going out later, but it's half term starting. Well, school's finished tomorrow for a week, and every year I've gone back up north to see the in-laws and with the family, and this year now daughter and wife are going tomorrow, and I have the fullest calendar I have ever had in any February next week, and it's all about the business network. And they're fully on side. It's really exciting, and you meet some interested people. It's all good.
Really happy to hear that. Really happy to hear that it's going so well that you're having to duck out a family commitment.
I do a lot. I very rarely duck out. But yeah, it just happens that week, and there is so much stuff going on next week that we probably can't share on here. But yeah, big week.
Well, as soon as you can, please do. You mentioned, we're recording in the middle of Feb. This will either go out in March or April, depending on the cadence. And there's a couple of things that you touched on early in that, Jez. So you said that roughly 50% of the people that were attending your live spaces were business owners. I was one of those. That's where I became aware of Scott. Shout out Scott Ellum. Previous episode on the pod, please go and check that out. He just launched Connecting Excellent, Bitcoin Treasury company. And I met Robin, and there was a lot of Team GB were on those spaces. It was a really good community, still is. But you mentioned that roughly 50% of them were business owners. What you didn't mention was what's the percentage of business owners in the UK?
I'm guessing now, but I'm thinking it was about 14%, and I think the figure was about 40% of the sort of people who answered our poll. So I remember thinking this particular Bitcoin community has 3 times the amount of business owners than just doing a straw poll on a street, which is quite large.
It's incredible, and I think there's something you mentioned, and this is something I see within the Bitcoin community. So you guys mentioned that it was really only 3 months of thought before you would launch this thing. And that kind of high agency, right? This is something that Daniel Priestley talks about a lot, that in the modern economy, the people that win are those that have high agency. So they just go and get shit done, right? You think about it, you go and get it done. You don't spend 2-3 years thinking about something, you just move. And that seems to be something that I see within the Bitcoin community as well, or within Bitcoiners. So just like off the top of your head, do you think high agency entrepreneurial folks find Bitcoin because they are that? Or do you think it's just a natural consequence of being entrepreneurs in that it lends itself to thinking about new technology and protocol?
Yeah, I think it does come down to that, just like taking action, and like as soon as you see that there's a problem, you take action to solve it. And I think that really comes into it with entrepreneurs and like us, all of us on this call, and probably the people listening as well, is once you see a problem, you want to take action to then fix it and find a solution. And you see that within business owners. And that's why it's been, a lot easier for us to have these conversations. And like just going back to what we were talking about before, like the start of the business network, and like kudos to Scott for like helping us like form that initial idea of it, and like being part of it, because he does a lot behind the scenes. But it's still like he had that idea, but then he was like, oh well, I can actually make my own company, or I can move it to be a public company. And the amount of time that he took to do that was very fast, in the grand scheme of things. So it's like, he just decided, right, I can actually go for this now. I'm going for it. And you guys, you roll with this. So it is nice to see. And it's like, I want to surround myself with people who can get shit done. And I
remember, you know what, Jordan, you've just triggered, it was last summer, and I remember I was we're moving, and I was looking in a part of southwest London, just browsing around streets, houses, whatever, and Scott called me on my mobile, and it was a scorching hot day. It would have been June, because we went away in July. And Scott was sort of leading with this business angle as Scott, not really the collective, but the collective and Jordan would have been a part of it. I was then in a position of being really busy with my day-to-day business, but actually almost being busy doing stuff I sort of didn't need to get involved with. And Bitcoin was the sort of side project that I was passionate about. And I had the sort of advantage that I had a profitable business on one side, and actually I don't need to monetize the Bitcoin side of things. Well, I want to one day, I hope. Scott then made this decision. I can remember I went to a newsagent, came out with a bottle of sparkling water, and it was Scott Ellum, and he goes, right, I'm going for it. I'm like, going for what? He goes, I'm going to list. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, what do you think? And so he was, we're both quite a million miles an hour. Everyone was, talking over each other. And then he goes, so this whole business thing in the UK, I'll have no time. I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to speak to my business partner, and by September, the end of summer, I'm going to be out of the day-to-day of my business. I'll lead on the UK business thing because you've got no time. And that was it. That was it. Over a bottle of Highland Spring in St Margaret's on a, and Scott at the time, I said, where are you? And he was at some train station having a Guinness. That's right. And so we sort of then went, right, well, you've got this focus. And I think that's needed, because you can in business, I think, if there's sort of too many of you inputting, you almost can get nothing done. And people, a smaller group, have to just go, no, flag in the ground, I'll lead this. Might make some mistakes, but we just got to go for it. So yeah, that's when the idea, but we had no idea what the network was going to be. Was it going to be something where a business would pay you $5,000 to come and present for the day? That'd be lovely, but sadly, no. And then if you remember, Jordan, back to your poll to the smaller group of businesses, you actually asked them, what do you need? What do you want? And then it was like, right, people want face-to-face networking. Some of them would love to work with other businesses and have incentives and discounts. They'd like a bit of education to send on to other business owners and somewhere people can go. And something that, maybe has this sort of more professional feel, and that's not decrying retail, and something just purely business focused. And that was it. And we went, right, well, this is it.
Hey team, a very quick pause. If you're a financial advisor, wealth manager, or accountant, chances are your clients have already asked you about Bitcoin. And if they haven't, they soon will. Which is why I've created the Bitcoin IFA webinars. The webinars are designed to give you all of the information you need to confidently talk about Bitcoin with your clients.
They're on demand, so you can watch them at a time that's suitable for you. They count as 90-minute structured CPD, and you'll get priority access to the Bitcoin IFA community. Head over to thebitcoinifa.com to book your webinar today. It takes less than 60 seconds. Again, that's thebitcoinifa.com to book. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, we literally took that survey and we were like, cool, that's given us all the answers. Let's build it. And then we started building it. And yeah, like the top thing in that survey was events and face-to-face, ideally, which is nice because I mean, it's hard putting them on, events, but I enjoy them far more when you're actually meeting someone face-to-face, because it just feels like you get so much more done, you're more productive. So yeah, that's what I realized. We've not even described exactly what the business network actually is. I'll just give a quick summary of like everything we've talked about and like what we were going to build. We've built it essentially, and we're still in the process of like, obviously we've built the foundations, let's say, and we're building it up. But it is a community, a network of business owners in the UK that are not necessarily, like, they're not Bitcoin companies. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make, is they are normal day-to-day companies. And some that many people will know, but they're just pro-Bitcoin and pro-business. And they just want to be, feel like they're together in a group of people driving. So the way that I describe it is like two-prong, and it's one, that we've got this ecosystem of amazing businesses in over 22 different sectors around the UK, and dotted from up in Scotland and to down in London, Portsmouth, like all spread all over the UK. And yeah, it's just about bringing them together. So we put on quarterly events, we put out business specific newsletters, and like we'll throw some like AI stuff in there as well, because it is valuable to a business to understand these sorts of things, because if you can make your business more efficient, then you've got potentially more profits to then put into Bitcoin. So yeah, this is what we're growing, and we started it with 50 founding members, and you are one of them, Dan, thank you. And we're growing rapidly, and I think the thing that we've noticed the most is now we're screaming and shouting about it and putting out loads of business content. We're getting so many more people coming to us that we had no idea about. And that's the people that I get excited about. When we always, we've got like in our CRM, we've got the leads that come in, and whenever a new one comes in and I don't recognize them, I just ping Jez and I'm like, do you recognize them? And if he says no, I'm like, okay, this is working. And that's happened a lot.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Really happy to hear that, chaps. One thing, so yeah, the Scott thing, just going back to that, the high agency ability to just move. When I first joined those spaces, which would have been probably just before Cheat Code, maybe March last year, Scott was on there and he was anonymous. And then went to Cheat Code and met him in person. And he was still technically anonymous by, I don't know, August, something like that, you know?
Yeah.
And then to go from that to the CEO of a public listed company in less than a year, right, with a Bitcoin strategy. That's the kind of high agency that we're talking about when it comes to Bitcoiners. Okay, I'm looking at time. There is a lot of questions that I want to ask you guys. I'm not sure we're going to have time for all of them today, so we may have to do a part 2 of this. I'm really happy to hear that it's going well. And you, Jordan, something you just said is that the people that are joining the network aren't Bitcoin businesses in the whole. They're just people that are pro Bitcoin and pro business. Why do you think those overlap so thoroughly?
I mean, well, certainly at the moment, being let's just say the UK environment, I think is pushing businesses to think outside the box and maybe look at alternatives that they've not looked at before. And why do pro-business and pro-Bitcoin go together? I think it does come down to that critical thinking and just thinking outside the box, looking at alternatives, because there are so many amazing companies out there, and I think we get caught up, and this is the thing that we try and talk about quite a lot, is like the positives that are actually happening in the UK, because what we're seeing, all the businesses that are coming to us are very positive. They're all profitable, and like there is like underneath all the doom and gloom, there is loads of amazing businesses in the UK, and we want to highlight that. But by highlighting that, because they're pro Bitcoin as well, it also pulls up Bitcoin, because we're saying, all right, there's amazing businesses doing X, Y, Z, but they're also pro Bitcoin. One example is Brewlo, for example, which is the non-alcoholic beer company. And they sponsored our last event. They're one of the founding members as well. They're a great business by a great entrepreneur who created the world's largest craft beer subscription company. And it's a UK company, but they're pro-Bitcoin. They've got Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So people wouldn't expect that. But it just brings up the credibility of Bitcoin, because I think a lot of people who look at Bitcoin still think, oh, it's just someone in their mum's basement trading, which that is not the case. And what we're trying to do is normalize it.
I think, and I guess myself, and it's been really interesting, and back to sort of how it's taken off. And even last night, I mean, what I'm finding is we're actually finding there are only so many hours in a day now. And I always said to Jordan that I would like to be within the UK Bitcoin scene, but not. I'd like to be speaking to business owners about Bitcoin, but not Bitcoin businesses. And even last night, I mean, the amount of inbound and meetings I had to very religiously, because you know what it's like with kids, work, friends, WhatsApp groups. And I have to say, it was just last night, and I sat down at about, 8 o'clock, went, oh my God, because I'd been out with my daughter for the afternoon. The amount of messages, phone pinging. And so I brutally last night said, I can't do all of this. I need to focus. So I literally just left loads of groups of just both personal, school, Bitcoin stuff, because actually, this needs some real focus, because it's very easy to get distracted into the Bitcoin scene. Whereas what I'd like to do, and today I've got 3 calls of introductions from business network businesses to friends of theirs who own other businesses, going, what is this? And I think, just yesterday, what we've tried to do and what we are building is some very shorter form content that can, and some of the purists, again, will say, oh, no, you've not spent 1,000 hours and read every book under the sun. You don't understand Bitcoin. I'm slightly, I don't think you need to go completely under the hood, and actually people don't have the time. But when I speak to my accountant and go, and it's a big practice, you've got 11,000 clients, the profitable ones, where are they putting their money? Oh, most of them are putting in these interest accounts, instant access, that get 0.9%. I'm like, right, here's the opportunity. The businesses have a problem, and this isn't really talking about inflation. It's that here is an asset, volatile, yes it is. You look at the history, you look at the way the world's going, and we are not saying that take all of your business reserves and put into it, but at least consider it. And here's a 6-minute video I've done, here's a 5-minute video Jordan's done, here's a one we're going to do of, big businesses have come to me and gone, really embarrassing question. Yeah, what is it? How do I buy it? Now, going and sitting with them or doing something online, I'm afraid, actually probably is more beneficial than, before you buy it, go and read 5,000 words of No, let me show you how easy it is. All right, okay. How do I account for it? Well, that's also very straightforward. Okay, right. Very simple. And by the way, how much should I buy? That is totally down to you. But remember, this is, this is long term. So that percentage can be a very small percent. Oh, and by the way, if you then have products and services or your type of business who could accept payments, you will get some extra business. How much I, don't know, but you will. And then also, we do these in-person events with some quite interesting headline speakers who probably you would never have got the chance to listen to. And you're going to listen to them in an intimate sort of setting 3-4 times a year. And that's sort of what we are, isn't it, really? And I think we cater for the big long-term Bitcoiner who's got a business, got it on the balance sheet, the curious business. And then the networking behind the scenes is going to be the fun bit of these businesses doing stuff with each other. We had it yesterday, Jordan. You were up filming, and one of the members runs a hotel chain in the Lake District. He wants to come down to London. He needs some new suits. He's got plenty of choice. Where's he going? He's going to McCann Bespoke. Why? They accept Bitcoin. Neil's into Bitcoin. They will have a laugh, have a chat over a fitting. There is no way Neil would have ever got his custom before.
Yeah.
So that proves it works, which is lovely.
Yeah, well, and actually touching on that, so you had your first quarterly event / launch event at McCann Tailoring in the city a week or two ago now. I was there. I can't remember when it was, but it was fairly recently. And you, Jez, you had a talk with a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, so Kwasi Kwarteng.
Yeah.
Very well read. On and published on the history of money, the history of hard assets. He's now launching Stack. Is it Stack Bitcoin? A Bitcoin Treasury company. And so when you see that kind of political and institutional engagement, well, firstly, congratulations on that. It was an amazing event. I was on the sparkling water. I'm deep into 75 hard for anyone that knows what that is. And I had to leave a bit early to get back down to the South Coast, but I saw Kwasi's, I missed my allocated train to see Kwasi's talk. And it was really good. And so, but what does that say, do you think? What should that say to UK business owners when you've got former chancellors of the Exchequer now exploring Bitcoin?
I think he sort of came from nowhere, and I was laughing with a friend of mine who's actually part of the network, and again, who is on this sort of journey who is super pumped up now because the price has dropped, and he's like, I'm just being able to buy a lot more Bitcoin for the business than I thought would have been possible at this stage, which is great. And I was laughing with him, and I've always done a bit of public speaking, not for a long time, but never interviewed anyone. And now I've done 2 interviews, and the first was Liz Truss, and the second was Kwasi Kwarteng. And so if you'd have gone back in time going, right, I've only interviewed 2 people, and for 48 days, these were the 2 most powerful people in the UK, maybe I should hang up my boots now. But aside from, say, Liz, who is very pro and open about the technology, this guy's different. You're right. He's absolutely superbly read. He's great fun. He is going to get involved. And, we laughed, and it was just last night I put a bit of a joke, and you've got to have a bit of fun with these people. But the lady, Jemima, the journalist from the FT, always, and I said, right, what we need to do, please come on her spaces. It will be polite because she's got a point that she's like, Bitcoiners are really rude and aggressive and hostile. And actually some of the comments back to her are quite bad, but, she does it for the clicks, I'm sure. But I said, listen, I promise this will be cordial, polite, but how about Team Red, FT and Jemima, Team Orange, Kwasi and Sailor? I mean, Kwasi flies straight back, going, I'm in. The gloves are ready and dusted, I think was his line. And you're like, fabulous. Now, is there a hope in hell this spaces will ever happen? Most probably not. But all I can say is, and I think probably we probably have had as much contact with him and his team as anybody else. And I don't think, I'm not looking at this as stack as, oh, it's another Treasury company. I think you're right. I think having the ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's incredibly intelligent and incredibly well thought of, by the way, trying to lead the charge for Bitcoin in the UK is so important, because we will have all these people who say, politicians, Bitcoin doesn't need politicians, doesn't need this, doesn't need that. You know, and I can agree with that. But also it does need prominent, eloquent advocates. You know, that this isn't as scary as people think. And actually, it's not scary. This is bloody important. So I think it's massive for the UK. Huge.
Hey, team. Just a quick pause to say a huge thank you. You've given us your most precious assets, your time and your attention. And honestly, it means the world to us. If you've enjoyed this episode or you take value from these conversations, it would really mean a lot if you could like, comment, or subscribe. Those things really help the algorithm and they help the channel to grow. And if there's someone in your life who would take value from this, maybe a fellow advisor or someone just curious about Bitcoin, please send it their way. You never know what it might spark. Okay, back to the studio.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's, when you see that kind of institutional engagement like that, then, it adds a credibility that, you talk about prominent and articulate, it perhaps adds a credibility that we don't.
Who else follows? And I think this is the other thing with the business network. I know plenty of businesses who join the network. They're not on X with their business, and maybe they're anonymous on X because their business has nothing to do with Bitcoin. And, maybe they're in a certain field that it could sort of get, funny looks from clients or customers or whatever. But they were so chuffed with joining the network, and then I'll find that because there's now not just them, there's all these different ones from 20 odd different sectors. And when they started, some of them are anonymous within the network or private, but plenty of them, Jordan, haven't they, went, right, I'll come on, I want to be private. And then they're like, actually, no, I don't want to be private. I want my logo on there. I want to offer a discount, etc. And I think this is going to be the interesting thing with people like Quasi, because you look through a lot of other countries, there are quite good spokespeople in prominent positions. The interesting thing I think is going to happen is after Quasi, who comes next? Because I think what he's going to do is make it safe for not just political people, but maybe big business people to go, right, he's come out first in terms of he's pro this technology. But actually, yeah, I quite like it too.
Well, we can but hope that he is the start of the larger and more prominent dominoes to fall. Yeah. Chaps, there is still so much. I mean, we haven't even touched on price. We haven't touched on the direction in the UK. We haven't touched on what it's like trying to shift people from a treasury mindset or a price mindset to a treasury mindset. So we will have to do a part 2. But for now, we're going to have to draw this to a close. We always ask guests the same question. So this is to both of you. It's always the final question. What is one positive thing that Bitcoin has brought to your life outside of number go up?
I'll tell you what. So I'll go first.
Deathly silence. Nothing.
Renewed purpose. Early 50s, business doing okay. And I went back to see some old school friends of mine last weekend, and a load of them have done quite well for themselves. And I was sort of going around, what are you up to now? And they're like, not a lot. What do you mean not a lot? And it was like, oh God, I'm quite a busy person, and actually before this I'd sort of run out of ideas of what is it I'm going to do. So I think a complete renewed purpose outside of, family and business that was going well. And I think the whole networking thing, have met some incredibly just interesting and fun people that I would never have met before. So that's me.
You snuck in that last one was mine.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, like, the people that we've met, because I've got such a passion for talking to entrepreneurs and like business owners, and this is now, over the last like 6 months, it's like given me that what's the word? Yeah, like I've noticed, because obviously being in Bitcoin and having the Bitcoin networking over the years, but now it's like, wow, I get to talk to business owners and Bitcoiners, like they're now merged into one. To be able to talk about that, of like, oh, you're building this really cool business, but you're just like plugging in Bitcoin here, or you're plugging in Bitcoin here. So to be able to, and also learn from, I would say also learn from these entrepreneurs as well. Like even like Jez, for example, has been instrumental in getting the Bitcoin Collective to where it is, and the business network to where it is. So to be able to learn from like people like Jez, and then meeting people like Joe, like Scott, like there's so many, and just like pulling little bits from them to then build the Bitcoin Collective into what it's going to be. That's mine.
Well done. That's beautiful. Thank you, chaps. Well, look, we're recording this in mid-February. It will go out in March or April. We will absolutely have to do a part 2 of this later in the year. Want it to be a roaring success, that I know it will be. Thank you, gents.
Cheers. Thanks,
Thank
mate.
you.